I'm delighted to say that we're now going to hear from the first of our 4 keynote speakers. And there are many reasons why I like this, not least of all is that I'm getting to know Terry Hayman quite well, not least of which we went to a comedy club last night with Paul Watchman. And it's quite interesting. You go with people who think are just like you, and then you hear the rude jokes and you think, oh, I might have made a mistake taking them here. But I hope they're not all young and innocent enough to be offended by what they heard last night. But before I get on with this interview, Terry Hayman is the Chief Financial Officer for the World Gold Council. And I know that in the time that we've been working with the World Gold Council since 2019, I've learned an awful lot about it. So I want to throw it out first of all and ask you, what industries you think gold affects on a really practical level? Where is gold used, apart from around your necklace or around your finger or whatever? So somebody shout out some of the industries that gold is critical to. Semiconductors, yeah. Anyone else? Yeah, we all love our iPhones. Okay, so we've got a bit of technology in there. The other industries that it's really important to is space, medicine, diversity and inclusion. Now, those seem to be 3 entirely separate sectors, but Terry is going to talk to me about just how gold impacts on the SDGs and just how important it is. Could we do it without? So first of all, please give him a round of applause. I miss giving them a round of applause. Can I just start by saying that I know that you're going to be, I think you're going to the COP27 meeting, because you certainly went to the COP26. Now, it's an interesting positioning for COP27. It's in Egypt, not known for its human rights, not known for lots of things, but it's at the front end. The whole African continent is at the front end of being most affected by climate change. Has anything moved between COP26 and COP27?
Well, firstly, hi and welcome, and thank you for your patience, because, look, you work everybody hard here, Adrian. Yeah. This is a full-on getting into it, and can I just say well done on the technology, because getting these hybrid events to work is always a bit more of a challenge than it looks. Yes, I'm going to be in Egypt in November. I think that COP27 will be very different from COP26. I think COP26 was very focused on targets and the road to net zero and what states need to do to get to decarbonize economies. I think 27 is going to be around resilience and adaptability, and how does the developing world and the rest of the world, but particularly the developing world, face up to the challenges that we're seeing. And we're seeing those challenges today. Look at Pakistan, a third of the country underwater. Look what's going to happen to Florida and some of these big climatic events that we're going through. So I think that a big part of the overall ESG conversation that's potentially been missing, and even in the conversations we've had this morning, is how wide is our aperture in terms of how we're thinking about the planet? And are we just thinking about developed economies, and this is what developed economies need to do, and this is how we decarbonize, and this is why we invest in tech stocks, because we all love our iPhones, and they are relatively easy to mark on an ESG agenda, albeit there's all of the discussion and dialogue that we've heard around data and challenges with that. Or do we think about ESG in the broad around the sustainability of the planet and what that means? And look, let's be realistic, that the countries that are going to be most impacted by climate change are less developed emerging economies. And that's why Egypt is a great location. It's going to force the conversation around what are the impacts of desertification and how the increase of the Sahara is going to impact huge populations that don't think that's not going to impact the rest of the world, because we're going to see increasing migration away from those places, as well as civil unrest and all the disturbances. So that other side around the need to support developing economies and drive economic development, to me, is a critical part of the ESG debate that sometimes we perhaps lose sight of.
But that's all about interdependence, really. And here we are in Manhattan, great coffee, well, good coffee, nice pastries. Do we really understand what it means to, unless we have the flood outside our door, unless we have the 12-foot high snow in July, do we get it? Can we possibly get it? I mean, what makes us pay attention and do something differently?
I think it's really hard to intrinsically feel it, because everybody is consumed with their life, and this room is full of asset owners and managers and the fiduciary responsibility you have around your investors. But you've got a huge range of different views of what's important to those people and what they care about. But I do think there are lots of people that recognize that to build a sustainable world, we've got to build an equitable world and got to create those opportunities. So let's look at Egypt as an example and linking gold to that. One of the biggest drivers of renewable energy in Egypt is gold mining. There's a company, Centamin. They are in the process of building out a huge solar array in the southern part of Egypt. Why? Because they've got a gold mine that they need to run. And they are transitioning from fossil fuels to solar. Makes great business sense. Egypt has a ton of sunshine. It has a ton of open land. What does it need? It needs the capital to come in and be able to support building of this solar array, which, yes, will provide energy for the gold mine, but actually will have energy, deliberately have a surplus of energy that can be powered back into the local community. How do we enable that transition that, yes, we need to move to a lower carbon economy and decarbonize, but we also critically have got to recognize that so many people in this world still don't have electricity, still live in poverty or near poverty. And we've got to include somewhere in that ESG agenda these are really important questions around supporting people's livelihoods in many parts of the world that we don't spend a lot of time thinking about on a day-to-day basis. And I think that's important not just for a just society and a just world, but I think it's important for building economies that are sound and resilient and ultimately will benefit everybody who's part of that economic system.
But is this all part of the report that you've recently produced talking about the impact that gold can have in climate risk and how we can help those people who are without to level the playing field a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, it kind of goes to this question, what role does gold play in supporting that transition to a lower carbon economy? I think everybody in this room would recognize we need to figure out ways to move to lower carbon. Gold has a role to play. Is gold going to be as important a metal as cobalt or lithium or copper in actually wiring the economy? No. But gold is really important in terms of supporting the catalyst of, in these emerging economies, the development of their economies so that they can build these solar arrays. That Egypt example is not an isolated example. You see the same thing happening in Burkina Faso. There's one gold mining company in Burkina Faso that is putting in a solar array to supply power to 40% of the population there. I bet most people in this room don't think very much about Burkina Faso at all, but these are the countries that are part of the broader ecosystem that we need to be mindful of, not just because it's the right thing to do, but because instability there, as we all know, can lead to terrorism and violence that has big spillover effects. So yes, a lot of the role that the gold mining plays is operating in these remote, rural, out-of-the-way places that need a catalyst for development. And again, I think that's a big role in understanding the bigger picture around ESG, which is not simply a risk mitigation approach, important as that is. But on the other side of the coin, really importantly, what can we be doing to support a healthy, sustainable economy? And for everybody in this room and following the conference, everybody in the capital market space, how do we direct capital, not just so that we are mitigating ourselves out of doing anything that could ever be construed as being a little bit kind of controversial, but also actually putting capital to good use. And I think that's been a big part of the ESG debate that's been missing. One point just on cobalt in the last conversation. Cobalt absolutely is critical. Look, I don't represent cobalt and don't know that much about cobalt, but I think it's a really interesting question around how are we going to get increasing supply of cobalt, which is very widely recognized as needed to support this energy transition. I would just say that companies like Glencore, we're a membership organization, our members are the world's largest gold mining companies. Glencore is not a gold miner, they're not a member company, but I can speak with absolute confidence that Glencore does not employ or use any child labor. And I think one of the big challenges for everybody in this space is to understand that interconnectedness and understand when you think about mining, what does mining do and how does mining operate? And child labor and poor environmental and social practices are just not the way modern day mining works. And for people to engage and understand, yes, this is a an industry that has its share of challenges. It is by its nature extractive. It is by its nature digging holes in the ground. The question is, how do you balance that with the needs of society, both in country and broader afield?
Well, that brings me on to the next question, and actually, again, it's interlinked here. It's about how can you, I think you've talked about decarbonising by 2050. Given that it's an industrial process that requires the use of carbon to retrieve this mineral, how can you do that? And I seem to remember you told me a story about a mine in Africa which had then been repurposed after it. So tell me a bit about that. And is that a blueprint for doing things going forward?
I'm probably a bit geeky, but one of my favorite books, 101 Things to Do with an Old Mine. There are old mines all over the world. And the question is...
And there's 101 things to do with them?
There are 101 things to do with them, from an opera venue in Germany, an old salt mine. Anybody from the UK who's been to the Eden Project, that's an old tin mine. Big tourist attraction in the southwest of England. Look, we as human species constantly evolve and develop the environment around us. Manhattan's a great example. So you look at mining as an industry, when there's a need for these metals and minerals, and we can talk about the need for gold, because gold fits in a slightly different category to most metals and minerals. But when there's a need for mining, how do you do that in a way that A, provides that economic opportunity that I've sort of talked to, and we've got lots of data on that in terms of the economic contribution that's made, and bigger than overseas development assistance to these developing countries, $35 billion in 2021, 35 billion, most of which goes in the form of payments to local suppliers to support the development and catalyze businesses in those places. But you've always got to be thinking about, all right, what do you do at the end of a mine life, and how do you regenerate the area and use it to support continued economic opportunity? So yes, that's a really important part of the way in which executives and frankly, you can't get the permit to build a gold mine today if you don't have a clear plan for closure and what that looks like and how you can develop that. Examples in Africa, one of the largest sustainable palm oil plantations is built on a disused mine site in Ghana. And we all know the challenges around palm oil and the threats that have been around palm oil. This is a virgin palm oil plantation that has been deliberately and explicitly planted because that region has the right climate for it. But again, it needs some capital. It needs somebody who's got capital and capacity to come along and make this happen. And one of our member companies finished the life of the mine and said, all right, how do we do this? And why do you do it? Yes, because it's the right thing to do. It actually works out as an economically advantageous thing to do as well, because otherwise, not otherwise, the mining company is liable for closure and reclamation costs. Much better to get that into a productive asset that people care about, that has a community around it. And all of that factored in at the point that you're given the license. So all of that's a factor that you've got to be able to say, yeah, we know what we're going to do when the mine comes to an end. We're going to do X, Y, and Z. Yeah,
and
mining is a hugely regulated industry. And absolutely, you need to set out your plans for closure as part of even the initial process before you start building the mine.
Wow, well, we heard a lot about the focus on the E in ESG this morning. What about the S and G? How should investors think about gold in relation to those two elements? I mean, we kind of touched on it a little bit.
We touched a little bit as it relates to mining. I'd like to go a bit broader and actually talk about what's the purpose of gold in today's world. And look, one of the amazing things about gold, it is the ultimate recyclable metal. Okay, nobody ever knowingly goes and says, okay, I've had enough with this necklace. I'm just going to bin it. Okay? It doesn't happen. Same thing with your electronics. Okay, there's gold in every single computer and iPhone and cell phone that people have here. The main market that drives the recycling of all these electronics is gold. It's tiny quantities, but that economic value, because gold is worth a decent amount, is what drives the recycling market for electronics. And so we have here this ultimate recyclable product, and you can kind of go, all right, why do we need to continue to mine this? Well, I think you need to continue to mine it because it supports the economic development in these communities. But why do we need gold as a metal beyond the industrial uses that actually makes your iPhones and cell phones work, which accounts for about 10% of annual demand? Because people rely on gold and have relied on gold as a source of financial security. And I think that is hugely important.
Explain that to me a little bit more.
So look, let's look at India. And India, developing a huge developing economy, huge population, obviously. It's changing quite quickly in terms of the number of people that have access to modern financial products. But until relatively recently, huge numbers, and still today, over 90% of people are unbanked. Okay, just don't have access to the financial landscape for a variety of reasons, but the top reason of which is the tax system and having to be registered in order to be able to open up even a simple bank account. So what role does gold play, and has gold historically played? Well, gold is a store of value. It is a store of long-term wealth, and particularly, and this is very true in India, but true in other places as well, is a store of value for women. Yes, there is a big tradition around jewelry in India, and yes, absolutely, that is to wear it for decorative purposes and to wear it as a sign of expression. But it is absolutely, intrinsically, a way of passing wealth onto women and ensuring that women have wealth in very many places where they don't. And those of you that are familiar with Indian jewelry, you'll see lots of bangles, and these are often very tight bangles that are hard to get off the wrist. That is so that a woman knows whatever happens in her life and whatever happens with her husband, she will have financial security by wearing this bangle around her wrist. Oh. And I think that's an important element of the overall story of how we think about the different role that different products play, that you've got to take yourself out of your own context. That in the West, that doesn't happen as much. That you can walk up and down Fifth Avenue here and go and look in the jewelry stores, and there's beautiful jewelry, but very few people are thinking of that primarily as a form of financial investment and financial, and I would say emotional security. And I think that's a really important aspect. And so why sort of talk about this? Well, I think it speaks to how we think about different products and the role they play in supporting the needs of the world. And sometimes there's a deeper story, and part of our role at the World Gold Council is to help explain that deeper story and help people think about and understand the context in different landscapes, different cultures.
But in terms of the amount of gold that exists in this world, I think most people would be surprised to know that it's actually very little. It's a lot smaller than you think, actually. I mean, what's come out of the ground? There's really not that much gold, which makes it really valuable.
There's really not that much gold in the world. So it's around, if you take a cube of 25 meters cubed, so kind of two Olympic swimming pools, all of the gold that's ever been mined could fit into 2 Olympic-sized swimming pools. So yeah, it's a scarce material, and look, grades of gold are low. You have to move a lot of earth to get a little bit of gold, which prompts the obvious questions: do we really need to do that? Is that something that is societally acceptable? Which goes back to all of this discussion around how you contribute that wealth and how you address poverty. And that, for me, is the biggest single thing that's missing in the ESG agenda. Of course, we've got to focus on environment. Of course, we've got to focus on moving to net zero. Yes, got to get the right governance in place. But on the social side, how do we think about poverty and addressing poverty and actually using, directing capital flows into companies and investments that are going to be able to play a role in supporting poverty alleviation? Because with all due respect, a lot of people in the investment space are not at the poverty line, and yet it's a huge societal challenge globally.
So when you look at the SDGs and you look at your work on a daily basis, you align those two things and you kind of go, this is what when we're making big decisions about what we do and where we mine and what we don't do and all the rest of it, we need to keep those SDGs in mind. What are the ones that are right at the forefront of your mind when you're thinking about things?
So yes, absolutely. Look, we at the World Gold Council don't operate mines ourselves. Our members, who are the world's largest gold mining companies, operate mines all around the world. And I can tell you, because I spend a lot of time with the members, making a positive impact in the places where they're operating is hugely important. And absolutely, the SDGs is a great framework to align on what you're doing. So look at education and supporting healthy schools and an education system. Mines around the world build schools and build the education facilities. Do they have to do that? No. Do they decide it's a good thing to do? Yes. Not because it's just, okay, we're going to sort of build a school and hands off, but because they want to build resilient communities, because it makes a ton of sense to operate in places where you have healthy, educated, resilient communities. Same with healthcare. COVID was a really, in some ways, sobering example of the struggle that so many healthcare systems had around the world. Yes, to deliver medication, but even before that, to just help people understand what was going on. And again, in many of these remote rural communities, people look to the big employees and where it's a gold mine, the gold mines to come and help and explain to people, okay, what do we do? What's happening? How do we operate? How do we keep ourselves safe? There's a real need for institutions and organizations that have capacity to be able to help explain things and educate people. And very often in so many of these places, yes, absolutely in developing economies, but even in the USA and Canada that has a lot of gold mining, to be a source of contribution and knowledge to the local community. Gold mines only work if they're a partnership, SDG 17. And that concept of partnership is really important in building partnerships. And I think, again, that's an area that everybody thinking about ESG and what they're looking at should be looking towards is around, do these companies care about their long-term contribution to the communities that they are part of?
But that's capacity and will, isn't it? It's trying to get those two things side by side. You can say, I've got the capacity for it, but you know what? It's a bit difficult to do that. I'll do the easy route. I'll do what we've always done because we get returns and all the rest of it. So you have to keep working with people to make sure that the will is there, and you have to keep setting the example, and presumably that's what the members of the World Gold Council do.
Yeah, absolutely. No question about that. And look, from time to time, things go wrong. In all walks of life, from time to time, things go wrong, and then you have to own up to it, learn from it, and develop. And we're all aware that from time to time we've seen issues in the mining sector. I think it is a sector that is really committed to doing the right thing. I do think, sort of just thinking back and bringing this back into the investment landscape and to the setups, the conversations this morning that I think set this up really well, I think there's an increasing realization that none of this is a simple, this is good and this is bad. And so in all of this, it's around what are my values as an individual and as an organization, and how do I line that with the value of that particular investment and where I want to put money in to do good. And I think that it's good that we're moving on from a very simplistic good, bad, but it makes life a lot more challenging for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, when it comes to something like ETF gold products, and there are a lot of them out there, they're all making various ESG claims. How do we as investors look out for who is really, because nobody's going to put their hands up and say, we're not doing it well. Everybody's saying, oh, we're the good guys, trust us, come to us. How do we find out just how true their claims are?
So one of the interesting things around gold is because it is this infinitely recyclable metal, you keep on getting gold that comes back into the supply chain. So in contrast to so many supply chains that we understand and are familiar with, where you have linear supply chains, there's a constant recirculation in gold. And what does that mean? It means that the gold sitting in your ETF, and by the way, we sponsor GLD, which is the world's largest ETF, but that gold that comes back in could be newly mined from Egypt or Burkina Faso or Peru or wherever, and adheres to responsible gold mining standards that are out there and are very clearly set out and explained. Or it could be gold that has been recirculated and recycled many times. And on the one hand, you go, well, okay, that's interesting because there's no incremental environmental considerations around that other than the heating of the furnace. But what's the social purpose? The way the gold market works today is there's huge reliance on the refiners, the people that are actually making gold into high purity bars, to undertake due diligence on where they are taking gold from to make sure that it's operating at a high standard. One of the topics one of the initiatives we are currently working on is putting a blockchain-based system in place for the gold market that will actually allow everybody to track where their gold has come from, and providing greater integrity around those sources of gold using technology that is now proven to give confidence on, okay, this gold bar, I can have, I can understand where it's been sourced, what path it's taken before it has reached whichever vault it's sitting in, and I understand that market. And I think that's absolutely what we should be doing.
Is that just an app or something? Or I mean, how does that work? How do I find it? And you mean investors rather than Mrs. Firkinshaw with her
Ultimately,
finger?
it will be Mrs. Firkinshaw sitting at home going, I want to understand this. Yeah, look, this is we've just moved out of the pilot phase. We're working very closely with the LBMA, who are the organization that oversees these refiners and sets standards for refiners who deliver gold into the wholesale financial markets. It is around modernizing the gold market so that you can have that information at your fingertips. Is it there today? No. Will it be there shortly? Yes, and that's something that we're really pushing on. And using the technology tools that are available to us to actually provide that trust and transparency in gold supply chains that hasn't been there to date. Again, with this big caveat that this is not a linear supply chain, and therefore it's more complicated and more interesting than sort of most of the supply chains that we commonly think of and understand.
When we first started our events in Westminster in 2019, we had Extinction Rebellion outside the door who shut down the whole of Westminster. And they were protesting about the way money was invested and what was being done, and stopping the people who were investing the money from getting through to the conference to talk about what they should be doing with the money. So that was quite interesting. So I thought to myself, well, no worries. Next year it's going to be so much easier. And then along came COVID, and I thought, I think God's trying to tell me something here. Don't be doing conferences like this. So I'm going to ask you, have you got a crystal ball to tell me what you think is going to happen in future? Because when I arrived here in New York on Sunday, you had the biggest thunderstorm with rain, and I'm like, I left this back, and in fact, I left sunshine behind me in England. So what do you see as the future?
I have no crystal ball. We would all love it. We'd all love that crystal ball. Trends, and again, it's been talked about this morning, and you're seeing it here. When we started in 2019, yes, I remember parading through the Extinction Rebellion crowds outside. And you know what? Good that there's that level of awareness and attention and bringing this to the forefront. I think when we started in 2019, it would be fair to say that this side of the Atlantic, there wasn't that level of debate and discourse around responsible investment and what that meant and how to think about it. The fact that you've convened this today is testament to the progress that's been made. And I think we're only going to see that accelerate. Look what's happening, all the conversations this morning. Look what's happening in the SEC. Look what's happening in the regulatory environment. There is, if you as a fund manager or an asset owner aren't thinking about ESG and what it means for you, not in okay, I'm going to go down that road or I'm not. Everybody is going to have to think about how they incorporate ESG lens into their investing landscape. And that's just the way it's going to be. And that doesn't mean, as we've talked about, a simplistic good, bad. It means, how do I use this additional lens and think about what it means? Yes, in terms of the values that I commit to, but also in terms of a risk approach and what risk I'm willing to take, and how I explain that to my investors and my fiduciary responsibility.
But the World Gold Council has recently launched something that's either 247 or 24/7 is what I'm guessing it is. It's an initiative. How is that going to help? Because is it going to make us look at things differently? Are we going to have to build our own frameworks for how we review things? What will it do?
So 247 is this work around putting gold onto a blockchain so that you can have confidence around where that gold's come from. But what does that allow you to do? That's an enabler. It sure will, I think, be really helpful for existing investors in gold. But once you have that and you have essentially digitized gold, you can then start being able to access gold in digital ways. And so where we are heading is to a world where the ETFs will still exist, but there will also be ways to gain direct exposure to gold through digital platforms, essentially the tokenization of gold. How does that link into the ESG agenda? Well, I think we are going to see more people questioning what assets they hold and in what form they hold those. I think regulatory environment is really important, and we haven't yet seen the regulatory landscape catch up around digital assets. We're starting to see that, and I think that will accelerate. So we're going to have this merging of kind of a big sustainability ESG trend and a digital asset trend. Yeah. And that's going to be a really interesting landscape. And look, we definitely want gold to be at the forefront of that. We think gold should be at the forefront.
Can I just ask, I'm going to kind of wrap this up soon because, as you all know, we're running a little bit late. But does anybody have any questions here for Terry because was that a hand up, or were you just saying hello? Hello, Paul Watchman, Can anybody hand a microphone here to Paul, or can you just shout? Go, we've got a microphone coming.
I was interested in what you were saying about gold recycling and also the importance of provenance, a bit like conflict diamonds, so you can say where it's come from. I heard a rumour about a year ago that the Gold Council and others were looking into gold bonds, a way of which they could have sustainably linked bonds in the market. But I haven't heard anything that has come through, or is that just something that is in the ether somewhere?
Look, we are always looking at ways to allow investors to invest and have exposure to gold in ways that works for them. We will always have physical backed. We believe in gold. We believe in the physical nature of gold and the fact that through having a physical product, you're not kind of lost in a securitized world that you don't know where the underlying physical asset is. Are we working on bonds at the moment? No, but are we thinking about continuing to develop new products that allow investors to have exposure to gold in a way that works for them, whether that be through physical bullion or ETFs or exposure through gold mining stocks? Absolutely.
That is a bit crystal ball gazing there. That is, you're trying to predict where we're going on that one. Anybody else? Okay. Now, Terry, you've flown over from London for this, or wherever it is you live, but we normally meet you in London. Why was it important to come here to New York to talk to this group of people, not just buy more gold, but why did you want to speak to this group?
Because I think the US is at a really interesting point in its development, and I think it's accelerating quite quickly, not least, as we've heard, through the SEC. And to push that point that I feel really strongly on everybody has to engage, okay? This isn't, I remember 2019 Westminster and talking about essentially the boycott movement, and there are some bad names and we're just going to avoid them. And there are still some people that are kind of in that space. And I've been a big advocate for everybody has choices and you need to engage and you need to decide for yourself what's important for you. And I think the North American market is moving rapidly through that. And I think that's great, but it's to set this challenge to people to go, don't come to events like this and go, all right, I just want the answers. Come to events like this to go, how do I think about this? And I think there's a really important role that some of us that have been thinking about this for a little while can play to just tell people, sorry, there are no easy answers, but this is a hugely important area and you've got to find your way through. And there are lots of sources of insight and guidance and advice, but you've ultimately got to decide what's right for you.
But fundamentally, I think we've heard that in the whole discussion about ESG this morning, haven't we? People have been saying there's no absolute way, there's no absolute right, no absolute wrong. You have to have a look at yourself, I think, both as an individual and as a company, and decide what's important. Slightly difficult, though, if you work for BlackRock and the annual letter from Larry Fink one year says, we realise that ESG is very important and we're going to be very mindful and we're going to do the right thing. And the next year says, well, we're not actually factoring ESG in absolutely. Do you know, if it works for us and we can do it, then yes, well, that's how we'll operate. And if we don't, well, what can I tell you? We've done our best. So it is a very difficult place that we're all in at the moment, because as consumers and investors and as the people who are moving the market, how do we decide how committed we are? You know, it's the chicken and egg situation.
Look, you have to find that for yourself, and clearly, and we heard it in the previous panel, the polarization around ESG and the backlash against ESG is making it harder for some people to stand up and say, this is what we believe in. And maybe without reopening the whole sort of nomenclature debate, there needs to be a way of saying we are investing with the right responsibility for our investors, following the fiduciary responsibility that we have, And we believe it's important to incorporate these elements and finding a way to navigate the landscape that avoids the backlash and avoids the, okay, we just want to push everybody who's anti-ESG into a corner, but going, this is what we believe in. And of course, those conversations aren't overnight conversations. And I think even BlackRock, you've seen that evolution and from time to time changes of mindset. But I would say, look, that we should be optimistic about the fact that these conversations are happening. And part of the reasons that we've been keen to be involved with the great work you're doing, Adrienne, is it's really important to have the conversations and the forum that says, we don't have all the answers, but we're definitely
Talking
on that journey.
Yeah.
And really interesting to hear the initials of the foundation and where this started, because it makes you realize where we've progressed. And that's where I hope that more and more people in the broader investment community will join in and say, okay, I'm willing to be part of the conversation. I'm willing to be open-minded and think about these things.
Well, you know, another person who has been a big supporter of ours from the start is the founder of Norges, as you know, Knut Kajir. He was up there at the very start, and he flew in for the first one, and then he did a virtual one for us for the APAC event, because we run these in Europe and America and APAC. And he was telling us on that first one that when he walked through the protesters or the family camping out, it seemed like in Westminster is a very expensive part of London. So our protesters were not, you know, scruffy looking whatever. They were mum and dad and pop, and they had nice tents, and they had their little cappuccino and all that kind of thing. So it was all very civilized. But he walked through, and they were giving out leaflets, and he took the leaflets. And do you remember he walked on stage and he showed the leaflet, and he said, I've been having a conversation with people. And that was really his message, is that we need to be talking. We need to be learning and understanding. Some of it's good, some of it's rubbish. But individually, we need to decide what's what and sort the wood out from the trees. Terry, it's always an absolute pleasure to have you on board. Thank you very much. Terry Hayman.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank you very much. Thank you.